pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Glad to see you all here tonight. Our next regular meeting will be Friday, July the 22nd, 9 a.m., right here at the Community Center. Please silence your cell phones if you haven't already done so. I will mention before we start the presentation of the budget, this is going to be shown over here on the TV, so if any of you want to move over to the other side of the room to be a little closer, go ahead and move now. Omar Hayes, our financial director, is going to put on a PowerPoint presentation of the 2016-17 budget. Afterwards, we'll have public comment. We'd like to limit those to 3 minutes with an extra 2 minutes that you need. We won't be real critical on it. We do ask you to come over to the microphone, state your name for the public record, but instead of just standing up and talking. So, Omar, you sure?
It's my show.
Your show.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? Omar Jesus, Finance Director. I'll be giving you guys a brief presentation regarding the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. This presentation should be an update as to what has transpired over the last 2 budget workshops. Some of the topics that we'll be discussing throughout the presentation. The first will be a trend analysis. I wanted to provide some information as to past performance by the district as well as the current financial condition of what the district is currently at. So we'll look at revenues, cash on hand, as well as reserves. And then we'll jump into the budget summary. We'll discuss some of the prior year comparisons, as well as recent changes and highlights that have come up. And then we'll conclude with some upcoming projects. If you have any questions during the presentation or about a particular slide, feel free to ask it at the time, or you can wait till the end. It doesn't matter which way to me. The first trend analysis that I prepared was a assessment, utility, and golf revenue line chart. The first line indicated in blue is the assessments. Some of the things that kind of stick out when looking at this graph is the 2008-2009 decline during the time of the market crash and that recession. Since 2012, assessments have been pretty steady, averaging about $3.5 million. Utilities, indicated in red, has been pretty consistent since 2007. No real big fluctuations that stand out when looking at this. Green is golf. You can see in 2007, 2008, 2009 the decrease, and then since 2009 you can see a pretty good indication of increase since. You can see in 2016 it looks like a big drop coming up, but the numbers for 2016 are only as of March 31st, only 6 months into the year, so it doesn't really give an accurate picture as where we're staying at the end of the year. The next graph is overall fund revenues. This is pretty similar to the first graph, but includes everything. For example, it includes community center rentals and pool admissions, so overall fund revenues. You can see in 2010, 2011, revenues were about $8 million, and then last year it's increased all the way up to about $9.3 million. The next graph I prepared for you is cash on hand. Kind of want to indicate the current financial condition of the district. You can see some of the things that stick out. In 2010 to 2011, you can see about $2 million was increased in the cash on hand, and another $700 in 2012. And then we've been dipping, slightly into the reserves over the last 3 years, but pretty steady around $9.5 million. The next slide shows some of our accounts and how we class them between operating and reserves. I've heard the term come up, URF, and impact over the last several board meetings, so I wanted to put a number to that phrase or to that account. The URF fund, as of September 30th, 2015, had about $2 million in it, and the impact fees were about $700. thousand. Currently, we're about $10 million on hand. $6 million of that is made up out of what we consider reserve accounts. So the other $3 million is operating. Next, we'll get into the actual budget summary for this upcoming fiscal year. We have 4 funds this year: the general fund, utility fund, golf fund, and then we've created the capital projects fund for the maintenance facility construction that will be taking place. This will just give us a better ability to track expenses that will be taking place with that expense. Some of the numbers that stick out in the general fund are the assessments, $3.5 million. This is the same number that we used last year's budget, so we didn't budget for any increases in assessments. And then the other numbers, the $291,540 funding from reserves. We'll discuss that a little bit in more detail further in the presentation. On the golf fund, the number that sticks out is the $615,940. This is the amount that will be coming from the general fund to subsidize the golf fund. The next slide is the expenses for 2016, 2017. The general fund number that sticks out is the $615, which matches the golf transfer in. Other than that, everything's pretty self-explanatory. You can see the capital fund budgeted for the $1.4 million in expenses. Any questions so far? Mr. Costi?
Are the golf carts considered part of the capital of the district or the capital of the golf fund? Golf carts are purchased out of the general fund.
That's correct. They're purchased with the capital fund or from the general fund.
They're recorded in the golf fund, though. The actual asset is recorded in the golf fund, but the funding source is from the general fund.
It does not come out of the golf fund. It comes out of the general fund. Out of assessments. Is that correct?
Yes.
Correct. Mr. Halbig?
$615,940 transferred from the golf fund. Does that include the capital?
That's capital and assessments combined. So $350,000 was proposed by the board at the last meeting, plus the $295,000 for the capital purchases. The next slide compares the current year's budget versus the upcoming year's budget. Last year, the general fund budgeted about $5.8 million. This year, we budgeted for about $4 million, so we've decreased the overall budget by $1.7 million. Utility fund decreased from last year, this upcoming year, $688,000. Golf stayed relatively the same, just a slight $15,000 decrease. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the capital improvement fund is new this year, and it's for the $1.4 million that's budgeted for the facility, the maintenance facility. Overall budget was $13 million last year, or this year, and then the upcoming budget is going to be about $11.9 million, so about a $1 million decrease in budget. Some of the recent changes and highlights that have been mentioned in the last 2 workshops.
What makes up that difference?
The $1 million difference. In the general fund, the majority of that $1.7 million is, I would say, we've removed that $1.4 from the maintenance facility, and we moved it into that new capital improvement fund. And then it could have been just different projects that we have planned this year. So.
It did.
It was budgeted, but it hasn't been transferred. So it was budgeted last year, never came out, still in Europe, hasn't been moved, but we're budgeting it in the capital improvement fund this year.
Why wasn't it transferred?
That project hasn't started yet. No reason to transfer it if the project hasn't started. So some of the changes that have come up in the general fund, like I mentioned earlier, we kept our revenue projections and our budgets about the same as last year. No increase, no decreases. Everything stayed relatively the same regarding revenues. Our prior year fund balance did decrease 74%. This year we budgeted $887,000 to be used from reserves. Next year we're only planning to budget $228,000. And some of the major capital purchases that we have planned, the signage project was proposed at the last budget meeting by President White and General Manager Tanya Kennedy. We have a security truck, a dump truck for roads and grounds, an administrative vehicle, and a large area mower for the grounds department.
The administrative vehicle is for what purpose?
It's going to be for travel and training, as well as just overall use for employees. We have 2 current Ford Explorers that are about 7 or 8 years old, which we'll be trading in both of those to get one vehicle instead. They are. They just have a lot of wear and tear. They'll have about 150,000 miles. So
One of them, I think, is mechanically.
one of them doesn't get used at all.
Yeah, it sits. One.
We know that. Putting a lot of money into it, week after week after week.
Right.
It's up to the public to ask.
Next is the golf fund, some of the changes and highlights that have happened. The board proposed membership increases for seasonal memberships only. The general fund contribution this year's the $615,940 that we mentioned earlier. $350,000 of that is from assessment, and then capital purchases make up the $265,940. Last year's contribution from the general fund was $699,957, and then the $15,000 slight decrease in revenue projections round out the golf fund. The utility fund, the board did propose a water base rate increase of $2.50. That would increase it from $7.75 to $10.25 this upcoming year. That $2.50 increase will generate an estimated $110,000, which we have allocated to the ERA fund. No prior year reserves or impact fees have been budgeted, and they only have 2 major capital purchases, one of them being a utility vehicle, a 4x4 Gator, and the other being a camera system to detect leaks. Joe?
So why are we getting an increase in water when we have water at $50,000?
That's probably a question for the public comments. Like I said, it was proposed by the board at the last meeting, so I'd say hold off on that one and ask it during public comments.
Another question on that, the Eureka fund, why are we still going after that?
You have to come up to the podium and state your name,
So that's Joe Eck. He's asking.
Nobody else is doing it, Herb, why should I?
because I'm bringing it up now.
Whenever you got something to say for everybody, point it out right at the first of the meeting. Don't wait till I start out. You always got that in mind.
It was brought up at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, I know that, but nobody
But,
called it.
all right, I'm bringing it up to,
All right, we'll continue forward. Some of the upcoming projects that we have, obviously the maintenance building has been a big topic. We budgeted for that $1.4 million that's going to be coming from the ERA fund. We have a pre-bid meeting set for July 19th, and then the estimated bid date of August 16th. Another project that we have in the works, or we can see forecasted, is the Miranda Homes. And it's been a topic of discussion. Projected cost is $500,000. The board did propose at the last meeting a $50,000 contribution for the option 3 that was proposed by Poston Engineering. We're still waiting on to receive homeowners' consensus in order to move forward with that project.
I'd like to, please.
And the last upcoming project that we have foreseen is the Cortez Road extension. At the last meeting, the county did deed over 7 lots on Shoemaker for drainage purposes in connection with that project. We still have a 1 lot owner that's kind of holding up the project. The general manager, Tanya Kennedy, is still in negotiations with that. So we've marked it as tentative until we can figure out what's going to happen with that. Any questions?
Questions, please take them over to the mic. Tom, thank you.
Tom Costi. We got the maintenance building budgeted at $1.4 million. At the meeting that was discussed, it was stated that 5 years' worth of collections in the Euro Fund would pay for it. However, we haven't budgeted anything out of the Euro Fund to pay for it. This must be money that the Euro Fund collected a few years ago that we're going to use to pay for it. It's not first in, last in, first out. Like, in other words, this year's collections are supposed to be the first one to pay this year's bills. And if we're spending money this year for the Euro Fund, isn't this year's revenue supposed to be paid first before we dip into reserves? That's my question. I realize it's all our money.
Hang on just a second.
Tanya, you want to answer that, or Omar?
We're budgeting $426,000, is that correct, from utility revenues to be contributed to URF? Is it 426?
So on you can see on the budget summary for expenditures, we currently have $548,000 budgeted to go towards Europe and impact fee reserves.
548. Okay, that's for the additional $2.50.
That's going to the...
That's going into
that's
the...
going...
No, that's going into the Europe account.
I'm talking about the money that's going into the building. Where's it coming from?
It's
coming from Europe.
$million that's coming out of Europe, which I allocated in the beginning of this presentation.
So is that 248 the entire collection?
Right.
It's going to be spent before we... You realize, you understand what
I understand what you're saying. We're going to use it from the Euro Fund, which is the $2 million. The $500 that we budgeted will go into that same account. Okay. One way or another, it's coming from the same account.
Several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, probably when we redid this building, the board borrowed $1.6 million from the Euro Fund to renovate this building and do some work out here. And a plan was put together to pay it back. At some point, it was decided in the last 2 or 3 years that somebody said, well, the board can spend that money however they want. But we're still collecting it in the Euro Fund, and we're collecting it as a water bill. Euro stands for utility. The U stands for utilities. This maintenance building is not a utility expenditure. And that's my question. What changed where we find it so easy to talk about using that money for things other than utilities?
There was a resolution adopted by the board that authorized the use of Euro funds for whatever purposes as deemed necessary. So in the year 2000, URF was established by resolution. And then another resolution was adopted by the board that said those funds can be used for whatever is deemed necessary by the district.
So I'd like to get the number of that resolution.
Yeah, I have that.
And thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Joe?
Yeah, Joe, the Eurythmy Fund was contrasted in 2001. Well, I've got the first receipt that ever came out on the water bill, because every time it came up, I protested it because it was supposed to have been for recycling the water for the golf course. And then they changed it around back when, I'm not going to mention names who was on the board, but a couple years later, and decided that they were going to take and use it for different things for the utilities users. But now I understand you're using it for anything you want. Now, that maintenance building could come under that, because the equipment is utility. And it could be used for that, I would say.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm going to try to blow through this as quick as I can here. But a lot of this came out of the body of the previous meetings, but and I think you covered this. The assumption is there's no assessment increases, right?
Right.
Up to this point.
Right.
Do you see that changing in any way, shape, or form?
We're going to study the assessments sometime this year and try to figure out something that we've put off for years, but it'll be next year before there's anything.
Okay, nothing's been said about wage increases. I think we probably got another 3% kind of across the board wage increase plugged into the
We
budget.
have a merit system with a 3%, yes.
We need to consider paying that again as a bonus so we don't get this compounding effect. You can pay 3% every year and 3% the next year and 3% the next year. You get a compounding effect that just, it'll eat you up over time. You might just want to consider that. We've done it in the past, and it might not be a bad idea to do that. That way you can selectively give people bonuses based upon their performance rather than going across the board. And I think employees probably like that just as well as they do it because they get it all in one chunk. The capital plan still indicates $460,000 in the Miranda. It's not, that hasn't been changed. It might be changed down, but the document I've got still shows $460,000 in the capital plan for this year's budget.
I apologize, it could have been an error, but the notebooks that you receive tomorrow for your board packets for the Friday meeting, we have corrected that.
Dave, I think where that came from, there was 460 that he figured for that, and then the road over there was going to get tore up, so that added another almost 30,000. We rounded it out to
I think there's a $50,000
It's 50, yes.
participation based upon the participation of the residents. But the point I was making, you still have $460,000 in the
We've
capital
corrected
budget.
that.
It's taken out of the budget.
It needs to be changed.
It's going to be taken out.
Okay. We're advertising for a new district engineer. Is that wages and benefits plugged into this budget?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't have any problem with that person. Hopefully we'll get a good qualified person. But years ago, it was in 2012, there was a resolution and a lot of work done on job descriptions. We're getting in a habit and I don't want to say anything necessarily about giving people an opportunity, but we don't, it's not beneficial to the district, it's not beneficial to the employee, and it's not beneficial to the other employees to put someone in a job that doesn't even match closely and hasn't had the experience for a particular job. And that's happened in the past, and that needs to be looked at seriously and corrected, I think. On the golf fund, I'm going to spend a little time on the golf fund, and Omar didn't say anything about the golf fund. I don't even see anybody here from the golf fund, from the golf operation. Where the hell are they?
I don't have a clue.
Are they interested in this?
I don't have a clue where they're at.
Can't believe it. I can't believe it. Okay, I got some questions. There's no across the board membership increases, only for seasonal memberships, right?
Correct.
You did mention that.
And it's 2% there, I think, or 2.5%.
Right. There's a membership, I'm trying not to take too much time here, but I'm trying to cover a lot of bases. Maybe I ought to slow down, but membership referral program has been changed, and it will only apply to referring members on yearly memberships only. That's what I understand. But there's a a flyer in here in the budget document that shows otherwise. That needs to come out of there.
That collateral material is being actually updated.
Yeah, but they used that as a crutch the last time by saying it was advertised, and that's what we're doing. That needs to come out of there, so nobody's got any question as to that it's not in there. We've got another $200,000 or more in golf equipment. Every year, It's $200,000 or $300,000. And what they'll say, and I wish they were here, they'll say, well, we're doing that because it's on the list. Just because it's on the list doesn't mean it needs to be replaced. There's 3 Timors that were bought in 2011, $105,000. 2011, the mower shouldn't be wore out. But if you ask the question, you know what they'll say? They'll say, well, we've been spending a lot of money fixing it. Okay?
Dave, you need to go look at them. They are wore out.
You know why? Because nobody maintains this stuff, Larry.
Well,
I'm telling you, if we need a PM program, you should be able to go over there and point out a piece of equipment and say, you show me when the oil was changed, when it was greased, when the filter was changed, and when the blades were sharpened.
I can show you when it was serviced, because they have all those records.
They have all those records?
When it had parts put on it, there is no records.
I can't imagine.
Kenya and I have talked about the whole system needs a complete maintenance program that covers everything. I don't care if it's a...
That's a PM program. That's a PM program, Larry. And they're easy to buy, and they're easy to follow.
We've talked about it. She's in the process now of looking for one, because it needs it.
When I was sitting up there, I had a problem every year. And every year it was like, it's on the list. So we got to buy it. It's on the list.
One thing I'll mention to you on the mowers, that $105,000, when you see the new budget come out next week, that $105,000 for mowers, and those 3 mowers, I've looked at them, and they're shook to pieces, is what it amounts to. The whole front end of them is just sloppy. But instead of buying them, we talked about leasing them, which we can lease them for $80,000, and that saves $25,000. In addition to that, they're thinking that these mowers are worth about the 3 of them's worth about $25,000 or so that'll come off of that too. So
I keep going back to my old John Deere I bought in 1995. It still cuts grass today just as good as it did in 1995. Okay?
I understand.
And only because I take care of it. You can pull the dipstick, and it's just as clean today as it was the day I bought it.
I understand.
And you know it, and I know it, and if you take care of it, it lasts longer, and you don't have to pay $300,000
There's no doubt about
every year. So, anyway, made my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? We're getting off pretty easy. Whoops. Waited too long. I waited too long.
How many times have I
Tom, I didn't name to encourage you.
How much time do I have? 3 minutes. We've just spent authorized $140,000 to be, or $50,000 to be put in the sewage treatment plant up on US 27 in a landlocked area that cannot be expanded, according to a study that was done back in 2010. At that time of that study, Polston and our former utilities manager projected that we were at that point in time we were operating at about 70% of our total capacity of sewage treatment. And in that study that they presented at the time, Julian estimated a 5-year requirement window in order to replace the sewage treatment plant to one that would be actually that we would not have to pump all of our sewage uphill to get to it. But a 5-year window, and he at that time was projecting that it would be needed and it would be ready to go if we build it on the 90 lots that the district has been paying taxes on just out Schumacher out here, just past the church, and between there and Granada. That we would be ready to go, and that could be expanded as needed as the district grew. And all that plumbing that is pushing all that sewage up to 27 could still be used and modified to be able to bring it back downhill to where a new and reasonably located sewage treatment plant would be. Part of his study indicated that property up there, he actually had realtors come in and do estimates of what the property could be sold for. It's the premier property. It's along the frontage road. Both those plants are very near to the frontage road. Those are commercial potential. He estimated the cleanup cost and et cetera, and that was all part of the study. I brought it up last year at budget time and asked that be looked at before we, the part of the plan that went to SwiftMud was when we started looking at the maintenance building, where we got to raise the land at the maintenance building 1.5 feet or 2 feet so that the floor won't be underwater like it is now. I suggested at that time we start looking at those lots that we're paying taxes out there. But it was ignored, and it looks like it's being ignored again this year. Last year, Mr. Wright said that we have only 1,500 lots that are buildable east of Cortez. Right over here, between Tanglewood and the rear entrance, between there, right in this area that we could walk to in about 5 minutes, there's 1,800 lots. Just before he left, John Graytech, just before he sold Tanglewood, came over and was inquiring about whether or not he could work out a purchase plan for that area where there's 1,800 platted lots. And that's still there. Well, that, plus the 1,500 that Mike Wright was talking about, plus the area along the north side of Deer Run, the front 9, where the number 5 is, that whole area out there where Pebble Beach and those other 4 roads haven't been completed, there's 250 lots there. So we've got 4,000 or 5,000 lots right now that are very saleable. There's no bond. Well, there's no bonds on them. There's no roads, but it's prime for a developer. But we're 5 years away from at least from being able to handle sewage from anything like that. The real estate bubble, the real estate market is starting to boom, and it's coming this way. Ron Wunderling was in here a week ago talking about the fact that he couldn't get subcontractors to work on Billy Casper properties this side of Interstate 75, over near 64. And it's coming this way. Everybody's talking about it. So I just think that I don't see any thought in this year's budget to either consider that, or even secondly, to start a marketing program again. I know that we got, in our golf fund budget, we got $50,000 set up in there for some advertising, but it's mostly local advertising. We talk about Twitter and Facebook, but we really, I don't see any even thought in this budget for any kind of a marketing effort up in the Midwest and up in New England to try to attract people down here. And any kind of an effort like that will take at least 6 months to put a program together, and it'll be another year at least for it to bear fruit. By dragging our feet now, whatever kind of a boom is coming, we're already behind the curve, I think. So I just bring that out, that I think those things should be thought of before we get through this entire budget season, and maybe we would want to rearrange our priorities or our perceived time of need. We got $3 million worth of projects approved right now that somehow they don't find their way into this budget because they were approved in last year's budget, but we haven't spent the money yet, and that's what we're calling our reserves. Am I right about that?
If we don't spend the money, it goes into the reserves.
It goes into reserves, and it doesn't become part of this year's budget. It was last year's budget, but we don't we don't reshape the priorities. That's assumed to be. It's called zero balance budgeting versus time. I can't remember what the other term is, where you just go from last year's budget and move forward. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I think they all deserve some serious thought. We still got 3 months or so before we have to approve this budget.
It's true.
So, anyway.
Just got through the primary part of it. So, okay. If I don't have anything else.
Mr. President, did you want Mr. Shoemaker to talk about Miranda Homes just a minute and about the commitment that we're going to need from the landowners? Just to summarize from the last meeting, would you like for him to mention a few things?
Yes, that'd be fine.
Okay.
Wait a minute. We got.
Oh, Joe. I didn't see Joe go that way. Just a second, Dave.
Joe, Can I talk about Miranda Homes now?
Yes, you can.
All right, you got it in the budget there, the project cost of $500,000. The board's going to propose $50,000 contribution to them. Right here is 6 homes that were CO'd over there where they did not have any final inspections on the waterways, drainage, and driveways. The county gave them COs on a piece of paper stating the fact that they paid Sun and Lake impact fees of $1,200, driveway $125, and totaled out at $1,325. But no inspection. And even on the final papers for the CO, it doesn't state where they had a final for them driveways or anything like that. Herb, and you and I talked about that at the last meeting. And there's the black and white right there. So what I'm thinking here is, as far as I'm concerned, I don't want my money going over there. It's not going to be benefiting me, anybody that's going over there. Any money that's spent in the district has to benefit the people that lives here. And so you got to watch yourself.
Thank you.
The plan that we came up with and discussed at the last meeting was that, looking at the potential fix to the problem that Gator Howerton has proposed is the $500,000 option. The district said that it was willing to contribute $50,000, and the residents could decide if they want to go the $500,000 route or if they just want the district to spend $50,000 cleaning out their ditches. But that's what the district's willing to do, is spend $50,000. In order to levy a special assessment, there's a multitude of events that have to happen in a mountain of paperwork. If we have 100% written approval from the property owners that they will commit to whatever the special assessment will be, then we can avoid 90% of that paperwork in order to levy a special assessment. And my recommendation would be is if the Miranda Homes members don't come up with that 100%, that I would recommend against levying a special assessment. They can figure out how to pay the $500,000 amongst, or the $450,000 amongst themselves, and wonderful. And the district cannot be involved aside from its $50,000 contribution. So, I mean, that's pretty much the long and short of it. Yeah, I mean, I think that the $50,000 that the district has put in the budget to contribute. I do think that is a benefit, whether or not it's going to benefit the district, and that at least we can stop wasting time talking about it at district meetings. But that's pretty much it. If we don't get the participation, there's no reason for us to to continue to try to help them.
Okay. Thank you. Ken, you have anything else?
No, sir.
Oh, I didn't see what
Larry Bertetto. Anybody drive down Miranda today?
I was down it yesterday, but not today.
Okay. Anybody drive Angelo Circle today? Where's the most water?
Angelo Circle.
And basically, this whole area has been a swamp. I mean, where I live on Angelo Circle, before they put in the drainage, it was a swamp. And, the people on Angelo Circle haven't complained because the water's going to drain. The only time I complained is when the drainage was bad for 16 years, and that's fixed, by the way. After the rain last night, by putting in a proper grade, the water came down and went this way. So before we spend money from Miranda Homes, or anybody, this whole area is a swamp.
You're absolutely right.
Whenever it rains in Florida, we're going to have that problem. So I'm glad one of our board members went there. Also, the fact is, I happened to see you at the hearing today, and thank you for one of the board members in coming. Thanks, Mark.
Anything else?
No, sir.
Adjourned.
Was it nearly as fast?
That was quick.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.